why is the dust white? Why is it white? There was a whole thing about when did the dust land on the film? Hi there and welcome to the next video. This topic is, I don't know, maybe it's going to sound really boring, but order of operations is actually, whatever part of the film chain you're working in, it's a critical issue to focus on. So let's look at how order of operation affects us when we work in Resolve and specifically look design. And as I say at the beginning, there's no absolute wrongs and rights. I mean, for example, there was a very prolific color grading educator who's on YouTube who's been, at one stage I saw them saying that you definitely should grade after your look. That's you do your shot balancing after your look. Call it zeitgeist, the common wisdom is that people normally grade under. They do in a display space. That once you're in the display space, that's the final. And you're in your working space, your high dynamic range working space is where you do your shot balancing and all your other tweaks. Not to say that one is right, one is wrong. I mean, think of the example if you're shooting stills on your camera. If you're going through some kind of Lightroom or Camera Raw or that kind of process, you have access to raw parameters in the wide dynamic range, but pretty much from then onwards, you're done. You display referred, to use that term, and then you're into Photoshop. And then you're in layers, and then you're doing your thing. So it's quite rare in that world where you're actually always working under a show LUT on your scene referred image data. But yeah, it's whatever works for you. It's a tool and it's how you use it. So let's get into it. Obviously through the whole process, there's an order of operations. Obviously pre-production, the shoot, the various stages in post-production, the edit, VFX, grading, and all those good things. That we understand. In the past, we've spoken about color management and the stages of working from wide dynamic range spaces, keeping your dynamic range as long as you can, and then at a certain point, making a decision and working specifically for how it looks on this type of monitor. For example, Rec 709, Gamma 2.4, or whatever monitor you're working on for specific deliveries. In our actual look design, currently this is the order of operations that I like to use. I like to do my matrix and HSL things first on the clean signal. It's roughly say it's that. Then I would apply my 1D tone curve in all the little aspects that, generally an S-curve, a kind of a contrast. Is there highlight and low light roll-off, any shadow tweaking or highlight control? And then the split toning. Having said that, split toning, doing specific film print emulations where you might cool certain areas and warm certain areas, that would normally happen here. But large white balance shifts, they could also be considered as split toning, and that they could happen at different places in your node tree. Just to show an example, often what I do, and it's pretty much as part of my 1D tone curve, is at the very end here. So essentially after the split toning, I might have another stage where I will do final tweaks on the low black point and the high white point. So some kind of clip, if you wanted the look of a CCTV, something that's on a monitor being refilmed, that kind of look. If you purposefully want to degrade the image and make it look very vintage or very archive or distorted in some way, then often you have this additional process. So there's no hard and fast rules. The quote-unquote rules are just to get you thinking, give you a structured framework, but job by job, case by case, and artist by artist will have a very different process. So be very careful as you pick up information, bear in mind that that's the mindset which you should take it on with. All right, so we also spoke about, we have technical transforms and creative transforms. That's how the orthodox sets it up, and the one we just apply, and then the other we have free reign of. But I showed in previous videos how these two things are actually very blended, and you can look at a standard display transform in these terms, these look design terms. So they're very similar. When we're designing a look, we're going to be taking the captured data and we're going to be shaping it down through various stages, and that's going to be the molding of the look or the look design. So that's kind of seems like a serial process which has a clear step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Then looking at our node structure, I've proposed this node structure, and this is kind of what I use. I vary it for different jobs, But, within our show look, once we're actually applying this show look stage, whether it's our HSL and matrix nodes or our 1D tone curve and split toning and clips, as I mentioned, they happen serially in the structure and, stage by stage. There are things that, when we're doing details, like the bottom left corner must be darker or the face must be brighter. Those work well in a parallel node set. So over and above how you think about making your look, also think about how Resolve works and essentially the difference between parallel and serial nodes. And then we'll talk about that a little bit. I did mention before, which is I want to get you thinking about this, levels of abstraction. So when you're doing look design, are you designing essentially a film stock that other people are going to use on footage that hasn't even been shot yet? Which means that you're taking into consideration concerns of footage that you've never seen, right? So it's a general approach. Or is it a specific job which has this specific criteria that can be written down and show references? Or is it a scene, or the shots within that scene, or details within each shot? So what level of abstraction is also very important to understand in the look design process. And if you're really going to jump in to firstly knowing what Resolve's actually doing and the process with inside a color corrector, you should also look at things like this, like what is the data structure within Resolve? If you've seen the Resolve manual, it's 4,000 pages, above 4,000 pages. So it's quite daunting, but there's a lot in there. And to be honest, even people, if you've been doing this for 30 years and more, like myself, there's always is a level where we don't RTFM, we don't read the manual, and we should. So there is a level of familiarity, there is that you must have, but there is always a deeper level that you can find, and it's as boring as sitting down and reading the manual, unfortunately. Typically within Resolve, the data structure, so I mean, if you can see it shown here, we have databases, but what types of databases? Where are they stored? They can be local, they can be networked, or they can be in the cloud. Within this specific database, once I've made that decision, then I'll have my list of projects. So yeah, at highest level of abstraction, and this is, again, I'm linking this back to order of operations, we have where is our project stored? If we're just looking at this grading structure, this grading process, then we have a specific database once we've decided how we want to manage it. There are now options for having folders within databases, which is a little data structure. There's users that can share and collaborate in real time on databases, and then each user will have permissions to get in and out. So there's that layer, that level of abstraction. Coming one level down from that, we have a specific project inside a database. Inside that project, we have a media pool of assets that we can use, but specifically we have timelines. So this is, again, a lower subset. We could have 5 timelines within one project. Within each timeline, we have tracks, and those tracks are populated with clips, and we have from clip 1 to clip 100 within our specific timeline. Each clip can have, edit parameters, fusion parameters, color, and obviously Fairlight. I'm not going to go into the other things because I really don't understand them well enough to explain them. But within the color page, if we just highlight in on the color, sub tree of this bigger project tree, each clip can have versions, and that's a whole new color setup for that can be flipped between version 1 and version 2. It's a function that I think people don't use so much now. We also have groups and node stacks. So these are different areas which we can segment our node tree into for a specific clip. Within each of those groups or pages, the clip page, the pre-group, the post-group, we can have a node tree. Within each node, it has its order of operations. And we can look at that now. And then within that, there's specific tools. So if we jump over to the Resolve manual, if we go into the color section, we'll see image processing order of operations, page 3200. Right? It's a real tome. If this was still getting printed out, it would be kind of one of these massive dictionary type books. There you go. In the overall image processing, let's zoom in a bit. Often this gets called what happens on the media page. It's kind of in the media pool. there's processing that can happen to a clip. So there's the camera raw settings. I think now Blackmagic's brought in their lens correction, which links to their cameras. Then there's project-wide color management that goes on. Any input LUT, so sometimes it's important to apply a LUT prior to it actually getting into the fusion or the color page. In deinterlacings, its super scale function. Then the whole fusion page as a block does its processing. Then this is quite interesting because this is actually bouncing around a bit. So we have sizing. You must be very clear. This is a big confusion, even with very experienced colorists. I get caught up with it as well. Is a piece of media comes in and it comes in as a weird shape, or you're starting to grade it, but the windows on this shot are shaped like that, but the windows on the other shot preset come out shaped like that, because it all auto scales to the media and the auto behaviors, within Resolve, how, I mean, this is a topic for a video in itself, but how all of this stuff, your timeline settings, your video output resolution and image scaling, everything that goes on here, it is very complex. And you'll see that where it fits into the process is it all gets applied first, which is kind of why certain behaviors happen, why the window is always being applied to a full-size shot, or is it scaled first and then apply your window? These kind of order of operations, right? It's important to understand. So yeah, we have the fusion effects, we have if we're using groups, our pre-clip grade, then some edit, so jumping back now to some edit page operations. If you're using O effects, they get applied, then our normal clip level, then our post clip level. Speed effects get applied after, so that might affect you. You should realize that you're grading first and then applying the speed effect. All the composite and overlay effects on the timeline, on the edit timeline, then the timeline grade gets applied after that. So again, jumping backwards and forwards, and then all these final processes which go into the delivery. Within a specific node, we need to understand that from the green input triangle to this output square on each node, this is the order of operations. Now, this used to be a much bigger deal in hardware color correctors on the telecine because we only had 2 stages or 3 stages. So it really mattered what came first and what was applied when. But now you can always add another node. There's no limit. If you've got 20 nodes in your stack or 25, it's no real difference. So you can take operations and you can break them apart, which is good to understand what each element is doing, and also you can play with the order of operations. But if you find weird behavior, maybe you should look to this order of operations. Now, the typical one I always highlight is you see color boost is first, and it's a type of saturation. Its behavior is different to master saturation, but you could theoretically desaturate all the way down using color boost, and then you could still add color with lift gamma gain, because lift gamma gain comes after. Whereas if you use hue and saturation to go completely black and white, you can move this lift gamma gain all you like and no color will come through. It will be a black and white image. So yeah, pay attention to this in the manual and look at the order of operations so you can see, well, basically know what Resolve is doing. Also to mention, if you want to find out about those projects, the higher level stuff, you can go to page 3985 of the manual, and you can look at all the project libraries and the collaborative and remote workflows. And there's a lot here, like, if multiple users, bringing them in, and this is it's very much more like a network, facility-wide, project-wide setup. In my opinion, although colorists do get lumped with this job now, it's really something that has to involve the facility engineer and the production process and VFX supervisors and the whole project coordinators. But yeah, depends on what scale you're working on. Okay, so just some examples now of when we talk order of operations. If you have this experience, then don't worry. This will be very obvious to you. But the thing I just showed was, if I use color boost to desaturate, I can get a quite a desaturated image, and then I can still, in my lift gamma gain, put in color washes. Now, a process that we used to use quite often was to, first we desaturate. So this is going to be a desat, and then I'm working after my look here in the post group, just on a formed image, because these are very simple operations that I want to highlight. Then let's say I was adding contrast and I wanted to put in a color wash. You know, I wanted like a very vintage kind of feel, or some kind of look. So I'm putting in a strong color wash. Then I can go back, because obviously I don't want a totally black and white image. I can go back and modulate how much of the natural color I want coming back. So this is the natural color aligned to one certain neutral axis, right? Also, after this, so this, if this is my, just simply call it a look, contrast, and split toning and all that good thing. After this, I can also have a saturation control. So I could then saturate or desaturate the effect of the split tone, which is a very different effect to if I bring this back. It's a very different effect to if I tweak this. So yeah, it's a very simple explanation, but order of operations is very important. Texture, I think, is a very under-examined feature of what we do. So just have a look here. So on the topic of is parallel right or is serial right? If typically if we're going to do a blur, if it's in serial, then you know 100% for sure that everything is getting blurred and nothing's sneaking through by mistake. But what if, for some reason, you've got your blur in a parallel node stack? Now, like that, it looks fine. But just to show you, what if, for some reason, in a similar part of the image, I also had some degree of sharpening going on? And you'd see that what you end up with is a combination of sharpening and softening. It's an interesting look. I'm not saying there isn't an application for it, but just having blurs and textures and grains and things like that in a parallel stack is a bit dangerous, because essentially what a parallel stack is saying is calculate the difference between the beginning and the start of each branch and then add them all to the result. So I'm going to use my desat from here. So it's all the way desaturated. So I have one of them here. And I turn it on. Great, black and white, wonderful. But if I take a second one, or a third one, you'll see that it keeps adding together. So not only have I desaturated, I've gone through the floor and into negative. I've actually flipped my colors over. So it's a predictable behavior, but you just got to understand what it's doing. So whether you're using normal parallel nodes or whether you're going to switch into these layer mixer nodes, that's also an important consideration. Last time in the previous session, we just did an arbitrary look. It had some these were the HSL and matrix parameters. And remember, we're working with first our HSL and matrix parameters, the so-called secondary adjustments, then the tone curve, and then the split tone. Those are the big blocks that I'm working in here. My 1D tone curve is situated here. That's what it was doing. And then I had a split tone, and I was lifting the black again. I was using film versus light to be the display transform. So I was disabled the texture and the look components, and it's doing a conversion from DaVinci wide gamut, DaVinci intermediate, to my display space, which is Rec 709 gamma 2.4. But what if we're going to do a screwball setup, just for fun, right? So what if I turn my look off here on the clip level, but on the group level, what if I take all those same components and I move them into parallel stack? So how would that work? So I'm doing my look design, but in parallel. I was doing it here in a serial line like this. So now what if I do it in parallel? So I still have my film light doing my display transform at the end here. But one thing to notice is that the overall contrast does change, because obviously the order of operations is different, and it's not adding a 1D tone curve and then doing your split toning on top. So it's not a cumulative effect. They get applied at the same time on a clean source and then get added together. So I personally wouldn't do it like this, but just as a thought exercise, try this out. You know, I mean, what is the difference doing it in parallel? What are the pros? What are the cons? It's quite an interesting exercise. It's not wrong, and I think what it leads to show us is that we're really blessed with how powerful and how wide dynamic range the internal workings of these color correctors are, you know, in terms of graphics processing, machine speeds, and things like that. That even in this situation, you still have the ability to recover stuff, or take it a long way in one direction and still bring it back. I mean, something to work into this is the downside of this is often we actually want to, you know, example would be in this situation, in the serial situation, that if once we had our look, so I want a contrasty look like this, but then after that I want to make the very low blacks milky, or I want to put a curve that's going to roll in the bottom end a huge amount and roll in the top end a whole lot as well. So like I say, if you purposely want to clip out the image or distort it in certain ways for a look, for an effect, then it might be something that you would do afterwards. And this might be a lot harder to do in the situation like this, where you're in a parallel situation. But not to say that it's wrong, but just as a thought exercise, you can check it out. Last off, I just wanted to have a look at what's going on inside the new Filmverse Lite. You'll see, if you open it up, you'll see that there are a fair amount of parameters that you can still tweak, and lots of them are linked to the texturing side, so grain, halation, sharpening, and all those things. If we just take it in its default mode, once we've set our working space, which is DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate in this case, well, because I've done correct color management here, converting from my camera space to DaVinci Intermediate earlier in my node stack, going through my whole look, and at the end, so I would obviously still be DaVinci Intermediate, and my display space would be 709 and Gamut 2.4. If I keep everything on, so this is the preset look, I'm getting, this is a good area to show it because I've got the earrings here, I've got an eyeball, and if I turn off the texture component, you can see that there's one of the big things about digital capture is it's very clean. It's too clean, especially for film emulation. We want to dirty it up. We want to soften it down. I mean, have you ever worked with footage from a drone, DJI footage? Very sharp, okay? And now if that's a topic for a later video, you actually want to not just blur the whole thing. You actually want to change the MTF, the modulation transfer function, which means some frequency ranges must get sharper, other frequency ranges must get softer, and you can design a whole sharpness profile across various spatial frequency responses. But that's a topic for another video. So yeah, there's a lot of work being done here. Firstly, well, let's look at the things we mostly talk about, which is halation, and you can adjust the amount of halation, how widely it spreads out, and then how much color saturation is in that halation. There's dust and the density of the dust, small dust specks like that. You can reduce those if you don't want them. If you want something more vintage, then you can bring that in. So, but why is the dust white? Why is it white? There was a whole thing about when did the dust land on the film. So if it was blocking light in the camera as the film was getting exposed, it would be one color. If it was on the negative in the telecine, because it obviously is a negative image, it would be another color. If it was on the print, it would be a whole nother color. And if it was on the print in the projector in the cinema, would it be slightly a different appearance. So yeah, just some trivia for you. Also good to think about those things if you're doing film emulation. What is the process that I'm modeling? And you model each of those stages step by step. Grain, obviously a big component of this. You can choose finer grain of 35mm or coarser grain of 16mm. It's very important to zoom in like this. Zoom right in when you're applying grain. And also choose the area very carefully. So you see here we have a highlight. How much grain we have in the highlights. So if I look at my scopes, I can see, oh yeah, it's changing. I mean, I can see a bit on the skin here. But where I'll really see the effect is if I go to lighter areas. I mean, even the shirt probably is slightly affected, but not a huge amount. I'd actually have to go to something that's really bright like this to check how much of that grain I wanted into the highlights. Then in terms of the sharpness, we can tweak how much of this sharpness we want in. And you can see that it's working on certain frequency ranges, which is really, this is the digital look that we really want to attack and we want to break down. Often it's this over sharpness in the high frequencies, but the lower, these broader, like the broader shapes, the outlines of a person or a whole building or bigger structures, we actually want to keep that, and film actually enhances those slightly, but it rolls off in the higher frequencies. So that's what you're seeing modeled here in these sharpness parameters. In terms of the look itself, you do have options for a stronger look, if you like a richer color, or if you want it more subtle. And I mean, just as a harebrained look at it, what if, okay, look at it this way. Everything, a LUT that you buy, a setting that you have, every single node, you can always tweak the opacity, and you can always do mixtures of certain amounts, because split the difference and all those good things which come into client negotiation and actually getting to a creative conclusion with your creative team. There always is that option. So just to be total screwball about it, I could be like this. I could say, here is my full Filmverse light setting with everything, with the texture, the grain, the film look, everything. I could take another instance of it and do this one, which is only, I don't want the texture component, I don't want the look component, and then I can actually do a mixture between the two. If I make this a layer mixture node, and then I can tweak the opacity of this node on top, and then I can work out how much I want of the two. So just bear in mind that there always is a way that you can work these various parameters. I mean, maybe it's about the texture. So over and above the wide control that you actually have of the texture, let's say I've got one version. This is a version with all the textural components. This is a version without, and I could say I want 0.5 of contribution of that, a mixture between the two. Or obviously you can go in and you can tweak each thing. You can change the grain size, how much detail, how much in the highlights, the whole grain amount. If you really just want a little bit, you can take all of these to the left and essentially make grain seed doesn't matter, but just how much is in the highlight, how much, and you can minimize all of these to create a lighter version. So yeah, go out there and give the Filmverse light a try. It's very interesting, and it's a great one-stop solution for display transform and for a nice film look. Generally, the topic of order of operations, once you understand it, it will just change the way you think about things. It's in one level, it's a kind of an engineering mindset to how things work, or a programming mindset of, this is the task, how do I segment it into various elements to understand each part? Complex task, I need to break it apart so that I can implement each of the stages. I'm doing film emulation, so I need to emulate the neg, then emulate the print, then emulate it's shining on a screen and all those effects. That's a whole process which is hard to understand, but you can dive into it and work out the stages. Are they parallel processes? Are they serial processes? And all those good things. Also, just to remind you that we've got in-person online courses coming up, and they're going to be live on Zoom. If we look out for the links of that, we're going to be talking about that a lot, and it's the real in-depth stuff. And the thing about that is you can ask questions that are relevant to your workflow and problems that you've encountered. So this is where we take theoretical knowledge, which gets pumped out for many people to make of it what they will, but this is personalized. And the in-person courses that I've done recently, the best part are the discussions that go on. In the recent courses that I've been teaching last month, it was such a nice mix of very experienced colorists, people who are just starting out, people who are coming from other fields like cinematography, from DIT, from visual effects, and it's an amazing interface and discussion. So yeah, look out for the courses, and we'll see you there.